evening. Welcome to our lecture. This evening it's going to be about whales. And let me see, how many of you here are related to whaling captains? You're in Bourne. Pretend if you're not. On the Cape, most towns, there are very few people that aren't related to someone, because more than half the men in any given town were at sea whaling, and they'd be gone for, I'm not taking all these thunder in my...
Oh, no, you're filling in where I didn't have it, so please, go
They
on.
could be gone anywhere from 2 to 4 years. And that's one of the things I found out at Nantucket, that the women became very independent. Because they were gone for so long and they had to take care of the finances, this and that. And when the captains came back, they were used to ruling the roost on the ship. And he said something and you just did it. When he came home, he found it was very different. His wife was ruling. She'd done it those 4 years and she wasn't giving it up. So you'll see a lot of women way ahead of their time out on the Nantucket and in the Bedford area. Falmouth had a lot of whalers too. So usually in an audience on Cape, at least half the audience puts their hands up and we ask anyone to mention whalers. He must be all Washington.
Be careful with that terminology.
There's nothing wrong with that. I have to tell you, years ago, the Cape Cod Guide, which you would get, it was a little yellow book and it would come out every week. And they also said, they had in there how you could become a Cape Codder. And there were 3 ways. One of them, of course, was born on Cape Cod. The second one is to marry one. Well, that was too late because I was already married, so I couldn't do that. I couldn't be born here. But the third one I could do. You had to live on Cape Cod for 25 years and you became a Cape Codder. Well, I got to my 25th year and I was ready. I was a Cape Codder. They changed the rules. It didn't work that way anymore. The only way is to be born on the Cape. So we're all wash ashore, so there's nothing wrong with that. So anyhow, I've digressed, sorry. This is Kathy Zagzebski from the Marine Life Center. She came to this area 9 years ago to work at the Marine Life Center. She's the director there. And one of her chores is she's very good at staying up all night. This is the sea turtles. But she also immersed herself into the community too. She's on the advisory board at the Upper Cape Tech School, and she's on the Main Street Steering Committee in Buzzard Space. So she is a Cape Codder too, in spite of what they say. And she's going to talk to us today about whaling and about whaling today as well, which most of us do from whale watching ships. Kathy?
Well, thank you, Judy, and thank you everyone for having me here today. I'm excited to speak with the Bourne Historical Society. And you know, one of the great debates is whether or not Bourne is part of Cape Cod. I assumed it was when I moved here, but it really depends on who I'm speaking with as to whether or not we're even included, especially since I live across the bridge. And I was sure she was going to say, how do you become a Cape Codder? Born on Cape Cod, born on Cape Cod, or born on Cape Cod. I've been fully convinced that I will never be a Cape Codder, but that's okay. I'm pleased to be a Cape Cod wash ashore. It's a great place to live, and I love Bourne too, the town of Bourne. We've got a lot going on here. So I am not a historian. I'm going to preface my talk like this. Many of you probably know a lot more about local history than I do, but what I do want to talk about is, next slide please, I'm going to talk to my strengths, and first I'm going to introduce you to some of the animals that we see in the region, and then we're going to talk about why they've been important throughout Cape Cod's history and how these marine animals have really helped to shape our history. It includes whaling, it includes also a lot of other uses, and we've moved in a lot of ways. We've moved from whaling to whale watching being very popular now, but the animals are still helping to shape our culture on Cape Cod. And then at the end I'm going to tell you a little bit about the National Marine Life Center, just in case you haven't been there recently, and invite you to come join our program. So that's the plan for the evening. Want to introduce you to first the marine mammals of Cape Cod, the pinnipeds. A pinniped meaning flipper-footed or feather-footed. There are a number of different species of pinnipeds, and we have 4 on Cape Cod. And the significant thing about pinnipeds is that they spend part of their lives in the water and part of their lives on land. So you'll hear a lot of talk about seals, and right now it's seal pupping season. There was actually a seal pup on the Scusset Beach jetty the other day. It was fine, it was just waiting for mom. So if you ever see a seal pup, you definitely want to leave it alone. The moms leave them ashore and while they go out hunting, and just call the proper authorities. And believe it or not, that's not the National Marine Life Center. We're the hospital. We work with other groups that work like the ambulance. And on Cape Cod in this area is the International Foundation for Welfare. There is a brochure back there called the Stranding Network, and that will tell you who to call anywhere in New England if you see any marine mammal on shore. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that brochure. These are I get a lot of questions as to what's the difference between a seal and a sea lion. First of all, we have no sea lions on Cape Cod. We only have seals. Seals have short front flippers with claws. Seals usually have a unique pattern or pelage to their coat. They use, on land, they can't walk very well. They kind of scooch like an inchworm, but in water they can swim really well, and they undulate kind of like a dolphin, where they move their bodies up and down, and they use their rear flippers for very powerful propulsion and their front flippers for steering. Sea lions, these are the animals that you normally will see in many of the shows, the aquaria. They've got those big, long, leathery front flippers. They can actually walk very well on land. They can rotate their hind flippers underneath, and they can walk almost as well as a dog or any 4-legged mammal on land. So if you've been to the New England Aquarium recently, they have fur seals, which are actually fur sea lions, in back of the facility, and the animals out front are seals. And again, any animal that you see on the beach, unless it's escaped from somewhere, should be a seal. Next. And walruses are a different case altogether, and we do have a specimen of a walrus tusk on that back table, so I encourage you to take a look at that. They do have some characteristics of seals. They don't have any external ear flaps. They have some characteristics of sea lions. They can walk on all 4s, and then they have their own unique characteristics of these tusks, which are used both in display, in defense, in aggression, and also in just helping them pull themselves up on the ice fields. Apparently walrus either used to live here or used to be important to people trading here, because there have been walrus bones and tusks found in Indian middens around Cape Cod and southeastern Massachusetts. However, thankfully, I guess, they no longer live in this part of the world. These are the 4 species of seals that we see on Cape Cod and in this region. The gray seal and the harbor seal live here year-round, and right now it's harbor seal pupping season. And then the harp seal and the hooded seal are our seasonal residents. So the harp seal is, usually we see these animals as younger animals, but the harp seal adult occasionally comes to our area. It's a brilliant animal. It's bright white with this very distinctive, if somebody thought it would look like a harp, I think it looks more like a horseshoe, a black horseshoe on their back. And this was a distinctive pelt. The young harp seals are those poster child of seals, those white fuzzy seals, and those, actually all of these animals are still hunted in Canada today. And then the hooded seal, we usually don't see adult males, but they do come to this area with younger animals. Next group of marine mammals are the cetaceans. These are your whales, dolphins, and porpoises. And there are over 87 species. We have over 16 that have been found around Cape Cod. And wanted to spend a few minutes on these because a lot of our history in this area involves cetaceans, whales of all sizes, and how we've used those whales over the years. Cetaceans are completely aquatic. This is a hot spot for strandings of cetaceans, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Some of the larger, there are 2 subfamilies of whales. There are whales with teeth and whales with baleen. So I'm guessing that many of you have seen these types of specimens before, if not touched them, felt them, and they may even be somewhere in this wonderful facility that we're in. But baleen is made up of keratin, like your fingernails and your hair. I'm going to go ahead and pass this around, but I Actually, let me describe it first. How it works in the animal's body is large whales have baleen instead of teeth. It works like a giant sieve or strainer in the animal's mouth. It hangs down from the roof of their mouth with the fringed side in. This is about 4 or 5 plates of baleen from a humpback whale, a whale that looks like this. And if you've seen a whale offshore or on a whale watch boat, this is likely what you saw. It's a very frequent visitor and resident for Cape Cod. Very distinctive animal, and they're great to if you are on a whale watch, because these are very acrobatic animals as well. So this baleen hangs down from the roof of their hair, but if you can imagine, instead of 5 plates of baleen, they have 200 to 400 plates of baleen. So each side of their mouth is longer and taller than me, and it's filled with this. When they take a giant gulp of food, they can have 2 to 3 tons of water and little tiny fish, shrimp, copepods, zooplankton in that mouthful of food. They then use their tongue, which weighs 2 tons, the size of a Volkswagen Bug, to push the water out between the plates of baleen, and then all the small food is left behind. So that's how baleen works, and I like to take a few moments to describe it because I think a lot of people know about baleen, but it's hard to visualize how this kind of odd-looking thing works in a whale's mouth. Another thing, though, that's important for baleen, baleen has been really important economically throughout the development of in the economic development of the area and in the use of whales economically. Before we had plastic, baleen, I mean, you'll see these are fairly dry specimens, but when it first comes out of the whale's mouth, it's very pliable, again, like, you know, your fingernails and your hair, and it could be molded very easily. So before we had plastic, this was a very valuable substance used in many of places that we might otherwise use plastic for. Umbrella stays, or umbrella ribs, corset stays. Thankfully, we have no need for that anymore, right? So just think about that as you pass the baleen around. Baleen was also, they did use it, the sailors who, or the whalers would use it to do some scrimshaw or some carving on it, although teeth were more common. So you can feel free. The second kind of whale are toothed whales. And this is a tooth from the largest of the toothed whales, the sperm whale. And the sperm whale looks like this, Moby Dick, your classic whale shape. Sperm whales are unique in that it's a 60-foot long animal, so it rivals that size of the baleen whale. They hunt giant squid a mile deep in the ocean. They only have teeth on their bottom jaw, and their bottom jaw is really narrow and actually kind of silly looking compared with this big bulbous head. When they hunt, they only have teeth in their bottom jaw, and with this tooth, a lot of it is the roots that's located in the gum. But the top jaw has a socket that fits each individual tooth. So for the whale, that helps when it's hunting this giant squid. It really helps it grip onto that very slippery food. As far as human use of teeth, these were very valuable. They were used, the sailors did a lot of scrimshaw, some beautiful, some less so, and they used it, and it was sold for a long time. These days you can only get baleen or teeth if you have a permit for it, because the hunting of whales was one thing that led to many whales being endangered. But as you pass it around, you can think about that. Most of the toothed whales are much smaller than that. That's a really nice sized tooth. How many of you have been to the New Bedford Whaling Museum? Okay, I figured. It was so amazing for me. The first time I went in there, I'd never seen that much scrimshaw, and it was funny to see these beautiful, beautiful pieces, but then also these pieces that were really like not so attractive, less artistically talented sailors, shall we say, stick figures and the like. So it's really an amazing collection, and it's really neat to see that. Baleen whales tend to be larger. These are the whales that have those long migrations. They tend to be more solitary, except when there's a mom and a calf. They tend to have individual strandings. They do not have the sonar that we think about with some whales or dolphins, but they have low frequency sound. And toothed whales tend to be smaller, and they have a very unique way of both communicating and navigating called echolocation. They usually have no migration, and some often mass strand on Cape Cod. One interesting aspect of marine animals that we don't usually think when we think about how humans have interacted with, used, exploited, in whatever way, animals throughout the years, is that a lot of these animals have very unique adaptations to an environment that's very harsh to people. And these are mammals like us. They're warm-blooded, they breathe air. And so we as humans, besides whatever uses we've made of the individual animals, we have often utilized the comparison and studied these animals for ways to improve our own use of their habitat. A classic case is dolphin echolocation. Before people would study dolphins, or before people really understood what was going on, they somehow figured out that dolphins were emitting this high frequency sound, and somehow they were able to navigate very complex environments. And we developed sonar, kind of a little bit separately from the dolphins, but then as we've refined our sonar as humans, we have studied, and there's a lot of research, a lot of Navy-funded research with dolphins in captivity to try to understand how their echolocation works, because dolphin echolocation is still more discriminating than the very finest of human sonar. So that's just yet another way in which we have taken advantage of and really learned from some of the marine mammals and in our habitat. These are some of the large whale species of Cape Cod, and the sperm whale being the only large whale that has teeth. The rest of these are baleen whales. And I just want to point out the North Atlantic right whale. This is the most endangered whale in the Atlantic Ocean. There are fewer than 500 left. The good news is that here on Cape Cod, we can see these very often. They like to eat a species of copepod, a species of zooplankton that is common to Cape Cod waters. And when these animals come close into shore, it's amazing. In fact, legally, we can get closer to them from shore than you can in a whale watch boat, because they're so endangered that they try to steer all the boats away. Right now, I wanted to spend a couple minutes with right whales, because now's a great time to see them. If you've ever been out to Provincetown, Race Point, Herring Cove, those are great places to see right whales. Sometimes you can see dozens of them. Right from shore, you can see these callosities. You can sometimes see the baleen with just nothing more than a pair of binoculars or even a camera lens. And it's really amazing to see. In fact, the other day, I heard from researchers that they're right off the coast of Sandwich, and people on Sandy Neck were able to see them. So we have a great opportunity to view these animals. They're called right whales because when they were hunted, they were the right whale to hunt, unlike some of these other fast whales. I mean, the blue whale, the largest whale in the ocean, look how sleek and slender it is. This is like the greyhound to the big bull mastiff, if you will. So the right whales had a heavy blubber layer, so it was very easily exploited. It floated when it was killed, so it was easy to retrieve, and it was fairly slow, so it was easy to catch. And more so than some of these other animals. And before we leave this slide, I just want to point out that sperm whale with that big bulbous head, again, made it a very valuable species from a whaling perspective, because in that head, and in the heads or the melons, the foreheads of many toothed whales, there's a very dense fat, and baleen and sperm whales especially have a very fine oil in their melon that helps when they emit their sonar and pings. It helps to focus the noise and the sound, but it also is one of the most highly pure oils. It's apparently even better than anything that we've managed to manufacture and refine today, although there are sperm whales are protected now. So next slide. The smaller cetaceans of Cape Cod, these are still whales, and whale is often used for that larger group of animals, but there are a number of animals. And one phenomenon that we have on Cape Cod are these mass strandings, when you get dozens of animals that come in close to shore. And just keep that in mind, because the long-fin pilot whale is a species that has been really a significant mass stranding. This is about an 18 to 20 foot animal. It's about 2 to 3 tons as an adult male. They also have some fairly well-developed melons, some fine blubber layers and stuff like that. Okay. So, as Cape Codders, as Bourneites, I don't know what you call us, the sea has been really important to us throughout our history. We recreate here, we've used it for commerce, for economic development, we've enjoyed the pleasure of the ocean, we've enjoyed the benefits of the creatures that it provides. From fishing to exploring the ocean to sea turtles, seals, dolphins, seabirds, sharks. We really have lived and are part of the ocean community around here. In fact, this goes way back. It goes back before we were whaling as Westerners, as we came and started exploiting the large whales. But even back to Native American times, the sea and marine life have always been important to peoples in order to help feed us, help sustain us as a culture. And I just want to take a moment to read this quote from Whirling Thunder, Paul Bullock of the Wampanoag tribe. When there was only water, the turtle became the earth, and the earth will feed us. The earth will quench our thirst, it will shelter us and allow us to breathe clean air. Our elders ask us to respect the earth, our great turtle. And so even the very symbols of some of our local tribes of Native Americans used turtles, whales, other marine life as a symbol of a being that was very important to their culture and to their sustainability. We've relied on the sea since the first people from Europe came over, and we shared, the Native Americans showed the Europeans all the bounty that was from the sea. I like this picture that I found online, and there was an image credit from ancientlights.com, but this was one of the first clam bakes. It was built with stone, much like we might do today. It had seaweed, shellfish, vegetables, flatfish or meats, lobsters and crab, husk corn, and seaweed. So all these were layered in one of the first clam bakes. And so as we came here, I think Europeans also relied on the sea, but the Native Americans here in this part of the world helped share their knowledge and helped us learn more about using the sea and the ocean resources. The Wampanoag tribes has been very important, or the animals of the sea have been important to the Wampanoags. The Mashpee Wampanoag symbol is the turtle that I showed you earlier, and the Aquino Wampanoag, their tribal symbol is the whale. The Wampanoag used to harvest stranded animals. So the fact that Cape Cod is this natural trap, and we do have a number of strandings that happen every year. It's been happening for hundreds of years. So the local tribes and the local peoples really saw this as an opportunity for harvest. So when the animals came ashore, they would harvest the stranded whales. And in fact, many of our native peoples, the Aquina Wampanoag, still retain their aboriginal rights to drift whales, as they were called. Now, they haven't exercised that right, with the exception of a whale that's stranded on the vineyard, and the Aquina Wampanoag had wanted to collect the skeleton once it was once the flesh had been eroded away for their own educational center. But they still have the right, should they desire to collect the stranded animals. They did start to go out whaling when the whales that stranded weren't enough to meet their needs for food and sustenance. They would whale from shore, but keep in mind, this isn't whaling like we normally think of. This isn't Moby Dick, this isn't, aren't these large ships going out. These are very near shore whaling. They were used small cetaceans. This is probably a pilot whale, like I pointed out in the recent slide. And so it was when these animals came near shore that the Native Americans would take that opportunity to go out and try to harvest some of these animals. It was low tech. They were using spears, harpoons, and kayaks. They also hunted seals, and that was an important part of their diet. And again, in many of the minidins that you find, there are parts from whales, dolphins, seals, as well as all other types of marine life. And they utilized the whole animal, not only the oil and blubber, but also the meat and the bones. And in the case of seals, they would use the skin and stuff like that. This is a neat legend as I was delving into local culture and local use of marine animals and kind of the prehistory of whaling. Moshup is a entity in a tribe, the Wampanoag tribe of Gayhead. And Moshup is believed by the tribe to be responsible for the present shapes of Martha's Vineyard and the Elizabeth Islands in Nantucket. So they believe that he is a benevolent being of gigantic frame. He's a giant, and his favorite food was broiled whale. So the legend goes that when whales came close to shore, Moshup would take these whales and he would fling them at the cliffs, and that's how the red cliffs of Gayhead on the vineyard, that's how they got to be red, because this giant was flinging these giant whales. And also part of the legend goes that Moshup would share what he caught with the local tribes. And so there was this being that was very generous in his hunting of whales. When the Pilgrims came, again, like the Native Americans, they would eat anything, any bounty from the sea. The first Thanksgiving apparently included, and besides turkey and venison that you might imagine, it also included waterfowl, fish, shellfish, eel, swan, and seal. So imagine coming home for Thanksgiving and finding a seal on your table. That would be interesting, and frankly, no matter how you feel about seals, probably not very tasty. Colonial whaling was really when we started as a culture to recognize the economic opportunities of whales and whaling. So before this, with the Pilgrims, with the first tribes, the use of whales and whaling was really more of feeding oneself and sustaining ourselves and keeping ourselves alive. But then we started, in the colonial times, started to look at the economic opportunities. The Mayflower, the ship the Mayflower, noted whales as the best kind for oil and bone. And they also had a drift whale harvest. So they took advantage of whales stranded ashore. This is a postcard of whales, of pilot whales or blackfish that's stranded in Wellfleet. And these people looking at these whales aren't looking at them to try to help and rescue them. They're looking at them as to harvest them. But the change here, the change that happened in colonial times was, again, rather than harvesting directly for food, they were harvesting for oil and bone and blubber. So they were harvesting them to sell, not to use themselves. They also had a shore-based whaling fairly near shore. It wasn't until a little bit later that the near-shore populations declined, and so whalers now had to start outfitting their ships to go a little bit into deeper waters. They had some larger ships, but this is also when the term Nantucket sleigh ride was developed, and they were still fairly low tech by our standards. They would have these large ships, but from the large ships, the smaller boats would be launched, and they would throw spears with lines into the whale, and then they basically, the boat would act like a floating anchor, and they'd hold on until the whale slowed down enough for them to catch it. So this was a very, very dangerous time for people, as the whales could very easily capsize these boats. If you think about, you know, a 16-foot whaler and a 60-foot sperm whale, who is very well capable of defending him or herself. So they did start to develop techniques at this time to process whales aboard the ship so that they could go for longer and longer trips. And so as our whaling industry developed, we started to develop some of these techniques, but then the American Revolution happened, and whaling basically stopped because the country was involved in other priorities. After the American Revolution came the period of the Yankee whalers. This was the early to mid 1800s, and this was really considered the golden age of whaling. So, and that's well documented by the Essex and all the literature of the time. And after the Yankee whaling period, then we started to see the decline of whale populations. So the decline of whaling basically happened for a lot of reasons. People weren't all of a sudden motivated to save the whale in the early 1800s, but the whale populations themselves were declining, so it was harder and harder to find them. It became more expensive to actually hunt for whales. We discovered petroleum, so that was an adequate substitute and a far safer substitute at the time for all the oil that we were getting from the whales. There was a reduction in demand of whale products. We started to find, through our technology, we started to find other substitutes that were cheaper, easier, safer for people. The American Civil War happened, and again that diverted attention from the whaling industry, so people really weren't interested in going out whaling. And then probably the death knell of the whaling industry happened with the rise of quote-unquote modern whaling techniques in Norway. So in Norway they started to develop explosive harpoons and better designs of ships. So they were able to actually more economically and more easily capture whales. They developed ships where they could be at sea for days, weeks, months at a time. And we really, because our economy shifted here in the United States, here in Cape Cod, here in Bourne, we really didn't have any reason to continue whaling. There are a number of other animals, though, that were exploited during this time. From 1888 to 1962, Massachusetts actually offered bounties on seals. There were 15,690 bounties paid on seals, and the reason for this was an assumed competition. It was assumed that seals were coming in and eating all the fish that we were depending on. It was estimated, scientists estimate, based on the bounties that were collected and a lot of the other historical records, that between 72,000 and 135,000 seals were actually killed during this time. So it really resulted in the virtual elimination of local seal stocks. Seals are very much in the news today, and I have a couple more slides to talk about that. But one thing that makes me laugh, especially after I started looking into this topic and researching our use of marine mammals throughout the years in this area, is that a lot of people say, oh, well, seals were never here. Well, they weren't here because we killed them all. So that's seals. In 1972, many of these animals, whales, dolphins, seals, sea lions, had been hunted to the point of near extinction. And as a nation, again, our priorities continue to shift so that economically we weren't dependent on these animals anymore. And these things combined caused kind of a shift in our culture, so that we passed the Marine Mammal Protection Act in 1972, protecting all whales, dolphins, porpoises, seals, sea lions, walrus, polar bears, sea otters from human exploitation, with some limitations and allowances for various economic uses. And in 1973, we passed the Endangered Species Act that afforded additional protections to those species that were particularly vulnerable, such as the northern right whale and the leatherback sea turtle. And the Endangered Species Act was the first act to actually also protect habitat in addition to individual species or entities. Shortly after kind of the early to mid 70s, after this kind of shift that had been happening and developing over decades, we started to recognize a new way of reaching economic benefit from the whales, and people started appreciating them on the water. And the whale watching industry began with just a few boats, and then people soon realized that people were really excited to go out and see these enormous mammals in the ocean. The dolphin fleet on Cape Cod was one of the earliest of the whale watchers, and the earliest record that I found that they went out was in 1975. And whale watching is actually worth millions of dollars to the local economy. I couldn't find exact numbers, but there's some for locally, but there were some estimates from some scientists from whale and dolphin conservation who have been studying whales and whale watching for a long time, that it can be worth up to $10–12 million a year just to the Cape Cod economy. Worldwide, from a 2008 study, whale watching attracts 13 million people annually. There are commercial whale watching operations in 118 countries, and the direct revenue worldwide is estimated at $872.7 million. There's additional indirect revenue estimated at 2,000 million. A lot of money. Seal watching is another opportunity that people have started to take advantage of. A lot of people come to Cape Cod because of the natural beauty and the resources that we have here, and a lot of people like to see wildlife, especially a cute little seal face like that. And so a couple of whale watchers, Monomoy Excursion and a few other local companies out in Chatham, started to develop this business where they started taking people out on boats. They could often do it in the off-season when people weren't fishing or between fishing trips, so it was a way for them to expand their revenue and be able to use some of their boat resources year-round. And a recent estimate that actually came from one of the whale watch companies is that the economic benefit of seal watching, both the direct benefit of tickets and ticket sales, and then the indirect benefit of all of these people who come to Chatham, go out on the boats, and then enjoy the local restaurants and stuff, is about $5 million annually in Chatham. As we started watching whales, we started to shift from wanting to help them as well. And the first stranding response organizations actually started happening in the late 70s. The New England Aquarium was one of the first respondents to some of these whales, and Mass Audubon at Wellfleet started responding to stranded turtles. Now there are a lot of other local organizations in addition to these who also respond to whales that are stranded or injured or hurt on the beach, including the International Fund for Animal Welfare, the Center for Coastal Studies in Provincetown, and then the National Marine Life Center. The Marine Mammal Protection Act in 1992 added some amendments that specifically created a mandate, an unfunded mandate, to create these networks of organizations to respond to stranded animals. And they did this for a number of reasons, not only because there was this ethic to try to help the animals, trying to help populations recover where they were endangered, but also because they recognized that marine mammals actually act like canaries in a coal mine, if you will. I mean, big, huge, slippery canaries in a vast, wet coal mine. But these are mammals like us. They're eating the similar kind of prey like we are. And what impacts them can impact us as humans. And so they started to see that sometimes when there's a red tide, the seals or the dolphins are the first things to strand, and then you can send out warnings for the human health agencies. So that was really part of the whole impetus for developing the stranding network. Not only helping the animals, although there was that ethic as well, but really understanding that you could learn a lot of science from the animals, you could learn about what's going on in the ocean, and it really became an important step in biomonitoring for the ocean. So that has started to shift in the last couple decades. We've started to shift to more of a scientific utility view of marine mammals. We're mostly no longer hunting them. We are still whale watching, but the scientific community has started to recognize all the things that we can learn from these animals, many of which I've alluded to. The fact that we can learn about the health of our oceans and get some advanced warning about certain conditions of the oceans, toxins, low reduction in oxygen, ocean acidification from climate change. We can start to learn about these things by studying the animals and the impact on animals. And not only the direct effects of the number stranding, but looking at how some of these things actually impact the animals themselves. So there are a number of local organizations that utilize the opportunity of marine animal strandings to study the animals more readily. And one example, we work with the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, and they are very interested in the fact that you've got these marine mammals, these seals and these whales, that dive repeatedly down to tremendous depths sometimes. They pop back up and they dive immediately down. How many of you are divers or have ever dove scuba diving in your life? Okay. How many of you know about, if you dive, we incur, we have to usually make a safety stop if we go too deep. Our bodies can't handle the gas exchanges, and so we have to stop and very slowly come to the surface in order to allow the nitrogen that builds up in our body to degas, and then we can replace our, we can come back to normal oxygen. If we come up too quickly, what happens? What do we get? The bends, exactly. So there's a scientist at Hui that has discovered that whales actually do get the bends. He's discovered this through strandings and studied the blood. He's found that there are bubbles in their blood, but somehow it doesn't impact them. They have developed these mechanisms to adapt to this very debilitating, the bends is really, really serious. If a diver, there are hyperbaric chambers all over the world to set up for divers that have gotten into this trouble of coming up too quickly. So as he develops that study, we may learn additional ways to help humans. Additionally, there is a researcher who is studying hearing adaptations in marine mammals, and we've worked with her a little bit as well. And there too, looking at the differences in how marine mammals hear versus how humans hear is helping us develop ways to address ear infection, address hearing loss, address a lot of different things that might occur. So there's a lot of interest in the animals from a scientific perspective. There are new conflicts, even as we enjoy them from whale watching or seal watching, but there are also conflicts over resources. There's conflicts over the fish that is becoming increasingly limited. There are conflicts over space. People and humans both like the beach, or people and humans, people and animals both like to utilize the beach. We all enjoy this wonderful environment, and if you're on a beach and a seal is nearby, at minimum, you really don't want to get too close because it might bite you. And so there are these conflicts over space. There are concerns about animals predating on fish. There are concerns about seals attracting sharks. There are concerns about parasites and other illnesses that might be transmitted from animals to people. There are concerns about water quality. There are also concerns about the increasing human impact on these animals. So there are a lot of new conflicts that are occurring as we increase our use and basically are both trying to use some of the same resources. There are also new opportunities, and many of these I've alluded to, that the marine mammals can be sentinels of the environment. They can be models for disease processes that humans face. They can be economic and tourism attractions. So, from my perspective, we're really all part of the Cape Cod Maritime legacy, and it's important to try to figure out how we can address these issues. What's next? There's a new movement in actually looking at dolphins as non-human people. I don't know how you feel about that. I don't know how I feel about that, honestly. But I do know that we have gone from this, where these beach whales were seen as an economic opportunity, to this, where these beach whales are seen as a scientific opportunity and a humane responsibility, and who knows where we're going to go next. So just wanted to introduce you briefly to the National Marine Life Center. Many of you have been there and know us well, I know. But our mission is rehabilitation, science, education, and also community development. We think it's important that we contribute to what we're trying to do here in the town of Bourne. Our mission is rehabilitation, science, education. These are our current facilities in that large building on Main Street, Buzzards Bay. This is our patient ward. And right now we have 2 active tanks. We continue to fundraise to expand their facilities, but these tanks are used for right now for sea turtles and seals. And as we grow, we're going to add additional capacity for seals, but also for those dolphins and small whales. So when we're fully built up, we'll be able to handle 2 to 4 dolphins, plus 2 pilot whales, plus up to 12 seals, plus up to 40 turtles in that building. Of course, at that time, we'll be drafting everybody in Bourne to come out and help. We also have planned a new Discovery Center, and that's really the public piece where we can bring more people into Main Street, and attract more local scientists to help with studying the animals, internships, job opportunities for the local economy. And when animals come in, we go through a rehabilitation process. We weigh and measure every animal and develop a treatment plan. Sometimes we have advanced diagnostics for them. This is a seal that we took to the Woods Hole Oceanographic to get a CT scan because he had a very severe ear infection. Before animals are released, we do tag them, so if they show up again, we can identify them. And then just a couple of stories. This is Townsend. He was that seal that went to Hui for a CAT scan. And he is a really interesting case. He was the first animal that we had in our new building. So he was important to us for that reason. But over the course, shortly after we got him, he started to develop a discharge from his left ear. And this was a whitish, thick discharge. And it turned out to be a middle ear infection. And it's actually a disease that our veterinarian is studying very intently and has been looking at for 10 years. So all of a sudden, this was an opportunity to study this disease more carefully and try to figure out how we could address it. Well, we knew from Dr. Williams' previous work that none of the treatments work. Antibiotics don't work, topical or oral. So we really, the only option we had was surgery, and yet the surgery that one would do on a dog or a cat or a horse hadn't ever been done before on a seal. So we applied for permission, and when you do something new, we have to apply for permission. We're highly regulated, even though we're a nonprofit and we don't get money from the federal government. We're highly regulated by them. And so we wound up getting approval to do the surgeries. We had them at the Cape Cod Vet Specialists up at the Rotary across the bridge. And the seal wound up surviving, which made us very happy. And this will show that Townsend was actually able to be released. He was released with a satellite tag so that we could more actively track him. These tags are expensive and not always necessary, so we only reserve them for those very significant cases. He was released off of Scusset Beach, spent some time off of Sandy Neck, off of Plymouth, and then headed north of Boston. And his dive patterns and everything showed that he was able to survive after his surgery long-term in the wild. He was able to dive, he was able to hunt, he was able to forage. So what this tells us is that what we did with Townsend worked, and the next seal we can try it, and our next steps are to try to figure out, we don't know why there are what seems like a lot of harbor seals and gray seals that are getting this ear disease. And our veterinarian really sees this. I mean, our role is studying the animals, but he also points out that ear disease is one of the most frequent reasons for children being prescribed antibiotics. Even though, as came out last year, and as doctors and veterinarians have known for a long time, most ear diseases don't respond to antibiotics, but it's something the doctor gives you because your kid is screaming. Right, Mom? I had ear disease when I was little. I had a bad ear infection. And so we don't know why the seals are getting this. It winds up being, this severe form winds up being more severe in seals just because of their internal anatomy. Their middle ear is basically this fist with very tiny canals in and out, so you can't really flush medicine through there. You can't have tubes like I had when I was little to help remove the infection. But what's the bigger question is, why is it happening? Even as we figure out how to help the individual seals, why is it happening? What's in the environment? Is there something in the greater Gulf of Maine ecosystem that's causing an increase in this type of disease, and can it impact people? We may never know, but we're going to do our darndest to find out. One more seal story. The Major Margaret is one of my favorite cases. She stranded, was rehabilitated, and released all within 10 miles, all within the town of Bourne. She stranded just behind the Coast Guard building on Academy Drive in Buzzard's Bay. And IFAW rescued her with our help, brought her right over to the National Marine Life Center. She was a harbor seal. She had these incredibly severe injuries around her muzzle. We think that she might have gotten her muzzle caught either in the rocks or maybe some of the lobster pots or some of the debris around the Cape Cod Canal. She stranded shortly after a superstorm Sandy in 2012. The worst part of her is these injuries look bad, but they actually healed pretty quickly, as you can see from the side. But part of her lip and part of her nose were cut off, so we weren't sure if she could seal her nose or close her nostrils in order to be able to hold her breath underwater. That's how seals hold their breath. We tried her in deeper water, and she could hold her breath, and she was able to be released at Scusset Beach last January. Right now, we have a number of sea turtles on site. Sea turtles are all endangered. We've just released 7 of these in Florida, but we still have this one, and Tide, the loggerhead. And they all look a lot better than these. These are their initial advent photos. But we're working their way through their disease, which they all stranded because of cold stunning, which is a severe form of hypothermia that causes turtles to strand every fall and winter. And it's interesting as I think about our history of using marine animals in this area and on Cape Cod, I found a lot of references to whales and whaling, a few references to seals, not so many. I don't know if it was just assumed that people used seals until they were gone or not. Very few, except for the native references and the turtle being the symbol of the local Wampanoag tribe. I found very few uses of turtles, and yet turtles have had to have been stranding for hundreds of years because it's part of the natural history. The turtles in this area usually aren't stranding for human reasons. So, were they part of this and just kind of not included in our history books? Who knows? But I just think that that's interesting. So I appreciate your attention tonight, and I appreciate your indulgence as I strayed perhaps from talking about Jonathan Bourne and the fine tradition of whaling that we have in the town of Bourne. I figured you all know that much better than I. And thanks for accompanying me on this journey as we talked about the history of marine mammals and how we've been shaped and continue to shape our culture. Thank you.
You answered the question about how the right whale got its name. Because we saw some off the coast of Sandy Neck Beach on the birding expedition Monday morning.
Oh, fabulous.
So with the telescope, there were 5 of them. So you could see them with the binoculars, but with the telescope, they were just bathing out. What do they do?
Aren't they amazing? I have to admit, because I was here for 5 years before I actually went out to see them. Usually it'll hit the papers and everything, or the radio, they'll say, there are whales at Provincetown. But I was here for a while before I went out to see them, and the first time I did, it was incredible. You could just see them with binoculars, you could see them so close, you could see them bailing, and you could see as they just, I envisioned mowing a lawn, they just went back and forth through what was clearly the patch of food, because they stopped at one end, they turned around, you could see them turn, they moved up, there would be whales passing each other, like multiple whales mowing a lawn. It's amazing, and so neat to have seen them on Sandy Neck. That's really awesome.
They were the highlight of our birding.
That's good. Hope you saw some good birds too. There's some great birds. Do you have a question?
What's the difference between a dolphin and a porpoise?
Dolphins and porpoises, often in normal usage, people will use those terms interchangeably. Dolphins tend to be larger, porpoises tend to be smaller. Dolphins usually have more of a long rostrum or nose, and we do have a dolphin skull on that table, so you can take a look. Porpoises usually have that very much blunter nose. But think of the pilot whale that we saw several pictures of. And pilot whale is actually more closely related to the dolphin. So there are some dolphins with that blunt nose. Usually porpoises live in colder waters than dolphins, but not always. The only really distinct difference, there are two different families of this greater group of cetaceans, so there are two distinct families. And dolphins, all the different dolphin species have cone-shaped teeth, pointed teeth, and all the porpoise species have spade-shaped or more squarish kind of teeth. And if you come to the Marine Life Center, I should mention we've got a great murder mystery play that's happening this week, so you can come on over and take a look at that. But we do have a porpoise skull, porpoise skeleton hanging from the little room in our Discovery Center, and then we have a dolphin skull that has some teeth, so you can kind of see the difference. But it's subtle, it's nothing you'd ever see on the water, unless you were really close to them.
What is the research with the ear issue? Where are they leaning towards with that research?
With the ocean sound in the ears? Is that, okay. So there are certain frequencies, that humans and natural phenomena can emit in the ocean that can cause ear damage to certain species of animals. And the whole issue of noise in the ocean gets really, really complicated because noise in water travels differently depending on the density of the water and the coldness of the water. It also depends on the frequency of the sound, if it's a low frequency sound or a very high frequency sound. But there are certain frequencies that we use. For example, one that was very controversial was low frequency active sonar that we were using. Actually, that debate was kind of silly because it was a debate, it wasn't even a debate between national security and science and environmental conservation. The low frequency sonar debate that, in my mind, from what I've seen over 20 years of researching, working, and studying with whales, that started as a debate between scientists who were using low frequency sonar to study global climate change and scientists who realized that the sonar could be damaging to whales. So, but there are certain frequencies that are damaging to whales. And it's a fact, it's been proven. The scientists at Hui have, with that CAT scan machine that I showed you with the seal going through it, they've actually CT'd hundreds of heads of different types of whale species. And it really depends which animals are impacted. Usually it's not any animal or person will be impacted if there's a blast close by, and that's the pressure wave in addition to the noise. But with the animals that are most highly impacted by the various frequencies of sonar, and it depends on the frequency, are certain animals called beaked whales, and they're basically traveling in that depth where the sound waves move most effectively, and they also have their hearing range is within that frequency, so it really impacts their hearing. So yes, it's happening. Yes, people are aware it's happening. Yes, occasionally the military denies that certain strandings are impacted by their sonar. Yes, occasionally environmentalists accuse the military of producing sonar that kills animals in cases where it hasn't. But there are cases where it has and cases where it hasn't. On Cape Cod, it's funny, every time there is it's not really funny, but when there are mass strandings, there are usually people who come out and blame military exercises. And here, as you've seen, Strandings have been happening, not that they couldn't in the future happen because of human activity, but here in Cape Cod, because of our geography and because of the species that we have, they've been happening long before humans had any kind of technology. So that was a very long and probably not a very exact answer to your question, but I hope I at least added some doubt to the issue, maybe? I don't know. Yeah.
Fishing at Bell Road, 12, 15 years ago.
The what?
We were fishing at Bell Road.
Mm-hmm.
A seal supposedly was living up at Ipswich, a baby seal, swimming down to the canal. We started feeding them. He had more tags on where they came from.
Wow.
Then he became a pet on this Bell Road. Couldn't get rid of him. Somehow you folks, somebody went out and got him. They nailed me. They kind of net or something to goodbye to him. I don't know where that. It was cute.
Yeah, it does become an issue. I mean, seals are relatively intelligent animals. Many people put them on par with the dog. And so they can learn very quickly. So it's one of our challenges as a hospital where we want to release them back into the wild and keep them wild. We don't want to create seals that are going up and begging from people because that creates more problems than it's worth. So we try to really limit our time. That's why when you visit us, we can't really let you into the hospital. We've got big cameras, but we don't really have tours that go through the hospital. As we build and grow, we're planning things like cameras and one-way glass windows so people can see what we do, but so it doesn't impact the animals. But yeah, that's you know, if they got a hand out from one person, that just like the dog, the first time you feed it at the table, they learn to go where the easy food is. I mean, just like me, I'll go to where the easy food is. Yeah. Any other questions? Well, thank you so much for having me today. It was a lot of fun speaking with you, and please come visit us. We're open this week. We have got a lot of educational activities through Sunday, including the murder mystery play, and then we're closed to the public until the end of May, but we will be open Memorial Day weekend for the summer. We have a 5K race on Sunday Memorial Day weekend, and then we have a gala at the end of summer, and we've got education programs throughout the summer. So join us, stop by, see us. And if you ever wanted to arrange, right after I just said we don't take people in to see the animals, I will take groups in for special conditions as long as the animals' conditions permit. So if you ever wanted to arrange a tour of your group, we can. Thanks everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.